Thank you very much, Megan, and thank you for everyone that has joined today. So I think this is quite a relevant subject, and we'll get into the detail. If there are any questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and we'll try and cover them. I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a background before passing over to Ollie, who's going to talk a little bit more of some of the technical considerations and things that we've seen. Ollie and I are lucky enough to have been through this journey many times in our careers, but more recently with our customers to help them on the journey of acquisition or merger or equally demerger in a few situations as well. So, Ollie, if you could just progress to the next slide for me, please. So who's this session for? So when it comes to acquisitions and mergers, there tend to be a number of different scenarios. The next slide in a minute, we'll come into the reasons why, but certainly those firms that are looking to acquire businesses, maybe it's something that's being discussed with you at the moment, that it's on the cards. Maybe you're being asked to come up with a strategy with what that should look like from a technology perspective, or maybe you are joining today from a non-technical perspective and you're thinking around what the technical considerations should be. And if you are, congratulations to you. We often find that technology is one of the latter parts of the consideration process when an acquisition. Maybe it's your firm being acquired or looking to be acquired from that perspective, and you want to make sure that you're helping the business be in the best state for that acquisition. Equally, you're looking to put your own stamp on that relationship as it goes forward, really, and show your value to the acquiring business. We see lots of people then in the next stage, which is that mid-integration, and they end up stuck there for quite a while. You end up with disparate systems being used. An amount, maybe email was merged or certainly configured to be able to work together in the initial stages. And then finally, mainly you're on a transformation or growth stage following an acquisition from that perspective. So lots of different reasons. But the reality, and we're seeing lots of professional services firms, specifically accountancy firms, less so legal firms. But at the moment, with the way that the market is, we are seeing accountancy firms being a sure bet for PE firms, for investment firms to be investing in. And because of this, we're seeing quite a lot of consolidation in the sector. Certainly a number of our clients have been on that journey where they have gone out and sought PE investment and they're now on that acquisition journey. Or maybe you're doing it organically where you're buying firms and trying to bring them into the fold. As I say, because the way that the market is at the moment, professional services firms, specifically accountancy and legal, are being targeted by those investment firms at the moment to go and build that. And one of the real challenges is if you are PE backed, if there is someone backing the business, you've got to be able to show your ability to integrate those businesses and not just go out there and buy them, because that seemed to be a failure if you just go out there and buying business after business. So we're seeing this become normal. We're less so seeing firms grow organically. Having said that, 2 or 3 of the firms that we are working with are determined that that is their route to market and ultimately becoming a USP. They believe while firms are in this acquisition phase that they can double down on what makes them special and leverage that to be able to grow themselves. We often see that IT aren't involved and deals are signed quickly, and then IT are left with the mess that needs to happen. And Ollie is then normally wheeled in to help try and untangle that and put a plan together. As I've already alluded to, that integration always takes longer than planned. People think it's probably going to be easier, and I know Ollie's got a slide on that in a moment. But it's actually, what does this need to look like, and now next later approach to that acquisition. Next slide there, please, Ollie. So why those integrations struggle? So you end up with not only multiple different Active Directories, Microsoft 365 tenants, but multiple applications that do the same thing with their own data boundaries. You've got processes. Many of you may be ISO 9001, 27001, Cyber Essentials that will then be disparate. You end up with poor visibility. Certainly if you're the acquiring company, you're bringing a lot of stuff. And in some cases, we see IT teams are being challenged to just connect the businesses together, with VPNs being connected all over the place, which gives large amount of security risk inside the business. This can lead to inconsistent standards. The focus on what your project and where your maturity was going can then kind of be left in the rear view mirror. And ultimately, we're there to serve the business, serve the employees, and make sure they can be as productive as possible, especially in something like legal and accountancy, where fee earners are what grow your business and help you be profitable. Ollie, any specific comments on this piece before I just do the last slide from my side?
Absolutely. So, by way of very, very brief introduction, so I'm Ollie. Been at Cascade for some time. Before that, I worked in the legal sector in a business where I did integrate a few different firms together. And yeah, certainly one of the struggles around IT being brought in late. I've had varying experiences back in that role. One of which was being told, all firm meeting happens, and then you're told, we're taking over a small law firm, and it's going live like in 2 weeks' time. And as an IT person, you're thinking, oh, is it now? That's an interesting kind of thing. Why wasn't I brought in sooner? And very often that's a case of management just keeping things very, very hush hush and wanting the fewest people to know until that deal is done. But that can lead to poor visibility from IT and knowing what happens. And then that has that knock-on effect of if IT are brought in late, then the collaboration and the mergers and the getting people working together just has to come in late, because you'll be rushing those things otherwise. So yeah, that sort of plays to the poor visibility side of things, and then frustrated employees. It all the things on that slide link together.
Definitely. Next slide then, please, Ollie. So I think we've already discussed all this. So the bigger challenge can be that whilst all this is going on, you're not able to then maybe keep up with the competition. And obviously, if your organisation is being somehow these acquisitions, the expectations will be that you're going to innovate with the money that is being provided to you, that you are going to grow. So the ability to be able to kind of stop, pause, integrate some businesses before you move forward often isn't available. I'm certainly speaking to some of the larger accountancy firms, and they're saying that they've set targets of 30 to 60 days to be able to merge businesses inside their firms. And I've heard of some of them that are achieving that. I'd like to live a day in one of those firms to understand what that feels like to the people that are achieving that. I am seeing other firms take many years to do this integration piece, because it depends on the nature of the acquisition. The autonomy of each of the business units is often kept separate during an initial phase of the merger. The cybersecurity element is one of my biggest concerns from this perspective, because firms coming together without the correct due diligence before network connectivity and other elements are done can really cause a problem. We've seen partners like Arctic Wolf be able to offer a fantastic ability to be overlaid on top of disparate technologies to give you a single view as to what's going on inside your estate whilst the mergers are outstanding. And obviously the risk is with centralized business systems, main business systems being changed, it can cause a lower productivity. So I think the next slide is yours, Ollie, and something that maybe you hear quite a lot. So over to you.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can have two businesses running on the same stack, both running on 365, but in reality, they have different third-party applications. They've got different ways of working. They've got different things going on. So it's not just as easy as saying easy because it's Microsoft 365 all the way. So invariably, when two or more firms are coming together, there's going to be a tenant migration if for a Microsoft focused firm, and it depends how easy that is. It depends on what features are being used in 365. If it's a very, very simple 365 implementation where maybe they're just using email and Teams, that can be quite a simple thing over a weekend. Normally the data from the smallest firm goes into the biggest, or the one that's doing the acquiring will be the target tenant. But part of the due diligence is working out which should be the source tenant, which should be the target tenant. If the branding is way off, you can't actually rename a tenant fully. They might want to choose a completely different brand and merge everyone in. That's fairly rare, but normally the biggest will swallow the smallest. And then we come on to what features are being used and what functionality. So when we're talking to clients generally about other projects, we're encouraging people to use things like information protection and sensitivity labels, use Intune, use all these features. They actually make mergers and acquisitions more difficult in a lot of cases. So if you've got labeling going on, the labeling schemes don't overlay, and you've got encryption going on, there's got to be a process to unpick that. And certain workloads in 365 are a bit more tricky to migrate than others. Certainly if you've got things like Power Apps going on, Power BI, dashboards, Project and Project Premium, all those have got their nuances around what can be done. And I'll talk a little bit about migration fidelity. So the sort of concept of how good a copy of the data you're getting. So at the most basic level, if you think about data being copied from one tenant to another, you can expect that the date of creation of all those things is going to reappear as the date of that the migration takes place. So when you look back at historical documents that have been migrated, those creation and modified dates are going to get trampled over. And then you've got things like one-to-one chat, whether the migration tool can deal with those sorts of things, because at the end of the day, those migration tools are using the same APIs at the back end that a lot of backup products are using. If Microsoft haven't exposed an API to back something up and restore it into a tenant, either you're not going to get that data, or the migration tools are going to have to use some pretty underhand tactics to get that data out. So one of the examples is one-to-one chat in Teams is actually quite difficult to migrate, and the reason for that is the Graph API and the way Microsoft have costed that access of data. It can make that very expensive from a data access point of view. So migration tools tend not to do it. The way they sometimes will work around that kind of thing is to do like an HTML render of what that chat looks like, and then save that HTML file somewhere. So that all plays.
It's quite fair to say, Ollie, that normally during these migrations there has to be some compromise by one side or the other. And unfortunately, unless in the rare situation where you are being acquired, but you are the bigger firm, the more mature firm, if you're the acquiree, your users are likely to have slightly more disruption, slightly more compromise than those in the parent firm. Is that kind of without fudges and fixes? And unfortunately, is it the reality?
I think so. A lot of the time, it will be seen that the one doing the acquiring gets their own way, and they'll use their systems and say, right, this is how we do things at large firm X when we acquire small firm Y. I think the more mature that is, they would actually take a really decent look and say there might be some practices and systems in the target firm that are actually done better than in the parent. So you might want a mix and match sort of approach in terms of what systems are adopted, what working practices are adopted. And you get things like mismatches in terms of retention, how long data is kept for. Particularly in professional services firms, we see a lot of instances where data is kept in a separate system entirely, like a document management system, and then your Microsoft 365 data is kept slim. You might have a retention policy to delete one-to-one chats after a month, let's say, or 6 months, and other firms will just keep everything forever. So
we have a question here saying, do firms usually want to bring over Teams chats? I would have thought this doesn't get migrated. Good question.
Teams chat, yes, very often. It is a useful thing. If you look at the back end, and I won't go into the details because I don't want to go down too far into the weeds, but different types of chat and different things, depending whether they're in a private team or a public team, are stored differently in different areas at the back end. So there's some nuance around what does get copied and what doesn't in terms of different migration tools and capabilities. But I would see that as a good thing to want to migrate. People have been chatting for a reason. Normally, the people would want their data to be migrated if it can be.
I think it may also depend on the type of professional services firm. Sometimes I see in legal customers that they deliberately enable the feature that means that chat is non-persistent, so it will hang around for a week or a month, and that's because they deliberately don't want elements that should be in the matter being discussed outside of somewhere like email or something like that can be recorded easily. Maybe an accountancy firm or a legal firm that doesn't have such policies in place really wouldn't care about it, because the nature of that is I forget what the word is, but it's transient conversation. It's not anything that should have any fact or legal basis in it from that perspective. Whereas accountancy firms and other firms quite freely will be talking about that other stuff potentially outside of it. So maybe kind of depending on the type of organisation a little bit there as well.
Yeah, completely. Let's move on to the next slide. So yeah, similar doesn't necessarily mean simple. So and this plays to, we've got slides later on about sort of discovering what you have, but knowing what's there will help a firm that's having a nice, mature, decent conversation around what systems should be used, what policies are going to mesh together nicely. We'll have a good idea of what's there at their own firm, but also at the other firm as well. And yeah, I think that slide really says it all. There's differences around applications very often. You won't be using the same third-party applications. There'll be a different billing system across the two, so it's melding those together.
There's a question here, Ollie, that says, is the goal to always have all users in a single tenant? Do many keep each group acquisition in its own tenant and just use the B2B features to grant access to resources instead?
Yeah, it depends why that acquisition is taking place. So if you look at sort of PE firms and things like that, they might be bringing together multiple firms under the same ownership. I think that's a different use case to what we're talking about today. Yeah, and those firms might be sort of buying things to then build the brand and then sell it off at a later date, in which case they're not going to want to crash things together. But for the most part, certainly professional services firms and our clients at that level normally are bringing people together to be able to collaborate together. And you're always going to get the best collaboration experience if they're in a single tenant. So I'd say, yes, generally that is the main goal. But B2B can be used as a nice tool to bridge that gap when you've got sort of third-party enterprise apps linked into Entra ID on each side, and it's not going to sort of take place over a nice, easy weekend. It might be that B2B is used to extend out the identity piece so that the third-party apps can continue to work until each third-party application can be brought into the same tenant.
Am I right in saying, Ollie, that in comparison to the features and functionality in Active Directory, where we could create trust between forests, I'm using lots of words now that are your words rather than my words, but trust between forests and stuff like that, that normally we, in days gone by, could deal with actually two completely separate companies being intertwined in a way that felt pretty organic from that perspective. But fair to say in Microsoft 365, whilst there are these B2B features and stuff like that, it's more around collaboration between two disparate firms than the feeling of one firm being together in different security contexts or something like that.
Yeah, I think if we were going back sort of 10, 15 years, certainly the first sort of consideration around a merger or an acquisition would be about Active Directory, about bringing it together. These days, people want to get collaborating, and normally the collaboration platform is Microsoft 365. So for the most part, in most of the migrations we've done, actually, we don't end up merging Active Directories at the back end. We get the 365 talking to each other, normally a single tenant, and then one or other of the Active Directories will wither away as applications get moved to SaaS or they get replaced by what's in the target firm. So very often, Active Directory, yeah, you don't link up the networks, but spot on in terms of what you're saying in terms of forest trusts. That's exactly what we would have done. I can think of one merger that we did recently. This was actually two housing associations coming together, where the customer knew who they're acquiring had absolute, let's call it technical debt, but there was a lot of mess at the other end. The acquiring firm was Cyber Essentials Plus certified. The firm they're acquiring wasn't, and if they'd linked up the networks, I think like in a few months they had their Cyber Essentials Plus recertification, they would have been in all sorts of dire straits in terms of what systems were there. So it's like a deliberate attempt to not integrate the networks at all, and just keep the Microsoft 365 together. Go to the next slide. Ooh. This is I think that was the slide we intended to talk over, so let's do that one. So we've got a bit of a framework in terms of how we approach these things. So I like to think of it as when you do the discovery and visibility, ideally, in the ideal case, the customer will know a lot about both environments. They should know about their own environment. That's not always the case. But equally, where there's challenges around the acquiring company, you may have maybe a small IT team. You may have people who've left out of the IT team and not the level of knowledge that you might want in that organization you're acquiring. So often we do a discovery exercise with the customer to look at what's there, what systems are being used, and do what I like to call a bit of archaeology and work out, why is that there? What was the historical reason for that? Is it still relevant? All those sorts of things. Having done that discovery and visibility and looked at the security and risk appetite, all the systems of records, etc., we then sort of tend to form a working assumption of how that migration is going to take place. So we'll get down on paper a strategy. I'll come back to that comment. We'll come back to that. We'll form a working assumption of what that's going to look like in terms of how we might go about that consolidation, how it's going to work, and then we do more discovery and we keep testing against that working assumption of how things are going to work. Case in point is normally that we look at third-party applications and we look at those in depth, and you might find that none of them are troublesome at all. You might find that one is just troublesome. You might find that in terms of enterprise applications linked with 365, you might find there's one or more applications that are in common to both organizations, and then you have to think about how we're going to crash together the HR systems if it's the same platform from that point of view. So yeah, we have this this six-step framework, looking at all the areas on there, looking at the integration strategy, keep testing that that working assumption against reality as time goes on, and then get them into the roadmap and executing it. And it depends on how on what's there in terms of what systems are in place at the source and at the target as to what that looks like. But it could be a very relatively easy roadmap, or it could be very, very complicated, taking place over months. It just depends on the size of things and what technologies are in place. Do you have any thoughts on that, Barry?
No, I think you've summed it up there. I think the important piece across all of this is communication, and communication between IT teams, communication between the senior leaders in the organisation, but the users, the employees, the team that are below it. It's any acquisition, any merger. There's a period where everybody is thinking, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my job? And it is important that we remember that below all this technical complication, there are people that we want to be building the future of these businesses around. So being able to find those champions to help us be involved in the strategies for how to merge organizations and the technologies, and making sure that we're looping them into that will be a really important aspect.
Brilliant. So yeah, discovery and visibility. Understanding dependencies, that's a really important thing. I know in previous roles, I've sort of set out to map out dependencies between systems. And when you do that in depth at any organization, you realize that actually there's probably several levels of complexity beyond what you realize, just in terms of, where IDs are stored in databases, in terms of, what systems talk to what other systems. If you're in a legal or accountancy thing, you're probably going to have a concept of a matter, or a number that's linked to a discrete item of work for a customer. You need to think about where those numbers get created, how they're replicated to different systems that deal with that. And then having understood that for the two firms you're bringing together, you've then got to work out, in the interim, how are things going to work while the two systems are running side by side, and then how are you going to bridge that? So yeah, what do we have? How do the systems talk to each other? How's authentication done? And within the applications, are things stored against the username? If it's an old-fashioned Active Directory bound application, is it stored against the username? Is it stored against a SID? Is there some other globally unique ID or GUID that's storing things? And how is that going to behave when we move that application to another place, or we've got external users coming in, or when new users come in?
The two things that I think from my side on this piece, Ollie, two things that I use if they've got access to them. The first thing you should have access to, and if you haven't, probably now is a good time to go and create it. So a service catalog, and anyone that's known me for a while, I preach about this because going back 10 years plus doing large DR deployments for the likes of the NHS, you go and ask them if they've got a service catalog, they say no. So that's the first piece of work we end up doing. So this should list all the services that IT provide to the business, not the VMs, not the online services per se, but it's actually, if you were to go and ask your users what are the services, what are the most important, what would be the effect of being down, that's a really good place to start with both firms, because then you can link them, you can put them side by side and figure out where you're migrating the data between which systems and what the future looks like for each of those systems. But if you've got a really good and mature service catalog, you'll also have things like what is the backup strategy, what is the DR strategy, and I think we come to those bits a bit later. The second one is lots of people have quite advanced Microsoft 365 licensing. And at the moment, we're doing a lot around AI. So we've actually got an AI event in our office next Thursday. So if anyone is able to get to Bristol next Thursday, I'd highly recommend that you come to that very interactive presentation. But
next
if you
Tuesday,
sorry, next Tuesday, apologize, everyone. So I'd highly recommend that if you've got Defender for Cloud apps, to me, Ollie, this seems like a really good tool to be able to run in each of the firms to tell you actually what cloud applications are being used. I think it goes further than that, doesn't it? It can go and actually tell you what's installed on the machines, I believe. I don't know if it's changed from that perspective.
Yeah, you get some decent inventory across, especially across Intune. But yeah, Defender for Cloud apps, that will tell you what applications are being used, both legitimate and maybe shadow cloud apps that that you don't know about. But it will certainly give you a really good way of doing that. And you get that actually if you have Business Premium. You can do the discovery element of that. So you don't need to have very big licensing. Yes, you need to enroll the machines in the service. But yeah, that half a day's work will get you some really decent data about what your users are actually doing in terms of third-party SaaS applications. And then, of course, you look at the enterprise apps that are listed, and a reference in the tenant, both legitimate and ones maybe users have consented to as well. But yeah, move on to security and risk. So yeah, you might have completely different sort of attitudes to risk in terms of the firm that's acquiring versus the firm that's being acquired. So you need to have a really decent idea of what you're doing there. And I mentioned it earlier, if there's certain standards or regulatory aspects around both, you need to make sure that you maintain your ISO accreditation, your Cyber Essentials Plus, etc. As you bring in a new firm, and also just from day-to-day practicalities of keeping things secure, keeping things patched, you need to know, is one side or the other playing a bit fast and loose with regards to patching and security. Things like VPNs as well. So there's quite a different take on home working and how that's done. If you've got a particularly legacy system, you might have VPNs going in place to enable users to get to file servers. If you've modernized and you're using SharePoint, you're going to have less of that. So yeah, maturity of security controls and identity models are being aligned. Is there Active Directory? Is there Enter ID? Is there Google Workspace going on in some of these firms? Because we'll find those sorts of things. And yeah, they can all be catered for as long as you know it and you know what you're doing going into it.
I think a really important aspect on this is if your firm is looking to acquire, it's a good time to just think, have we got all our standards fully lined up? Are we happy with where they are? Because certainly I've been working with some firms that are on a security journey and they're not really kind of sure what their benchmark is. They haven't really got, they might have Cyber Essentials, they might have Cyber Essentials Plus, but they haven't gone any more mature than that in terms of ISO 27001, in terms of regular penetration tests or anything like that. So from my perspective, if your firm tells you that you're looking to acquire, maybe a good time to lock in that first pen test or something like that to kind of know where you are. So when you start looking at other firms, you then have a set standard for what you're happy to bring in and what you're not. Because if you don't have clarity around your own security, trying to bring someone else in then becomes even more difficult to do in a secure manner because you don't have kind of a benchmark set for what good looks like and what acceptable is before bringing those firms together.
Absolutely. Then we move on to systems of record, and very often the customers will know their own system of record way better than we ever could as an outsider. But there's always different systems of records from different places, so that they all need to be thought about. You need to think about like billing and accounts systems, particularly how you're going to sort of plan to run those together. So it may be that the firm being acquired has got lots of ongoing work. Hopefully it has, because it'd be a problem if it didn't. How are you going to run that out? You've got matters or casework going over months, and probably you're going to sort of run out the old system rather than import records from the firm being acquired into the other one, because sometimes that can be difficult. Different systems work in a different way, so very often you fire up new matters or whatever in the the firm that's being acquired system, and then run out those, but that could take months. So how are you going to run those systems in parallel? The same with document, case, or matter management as well. You've got all the documents that go along with that. Service desk ticketing is probably a bit easier because they're normally short-living tickets. And how you crash together the CRM systems, what unique systems have you got? What happens when the client is in both places? How do you deal with those sorts of anomalies? So yeah, lots and lots of nuances and considerations around those. Collaboration experience. So typically when we talk about collaboration, that's very often Teams is a big part of that, but it's also email, it's also all the other systems, any other third-party collaboration systems and video conferencing or Teams, Zoom, etc. So yeah, the focus there is normally how do we get both organizations into a single tenant quickly, and that is the sort of gold standard in terms of interaction. So yes, you can do B2B, yes, you can do sort of linked relationships, but the experience is never quite as good as being in the same tenant. So we've had organizations that have tried that, sort of experimented for a few months, gone, actually no, we're still not feeling like we're one firm. We need to actually crash them together and get them into one tenant. And that's normally a good thing. It needs to be done at the right sort of time frame, the right pace. You do it too quickly, you're going to miss things. You're going to lead to a bad experience from a user point of view. If you leave it too long, it never gets done. And as the organizations are sort of coming together under one common ownership, you might not feel that the users are really meshing and collaborating properly. So yeah, this is people and culture things rather than just technical.
I think also this is multifaceted as well. We're talking largely around Microsoft 365 today, but you're also going to have VMs maybe on premises in Hyper-V or VMware or something like that. You're going to have maybe VMs in Azure from that perspective. I think typically what we do with most customers is build out a roadmap, and the element we're talking about here comes at the front, because what people tend to want is emails being sent from one place. Whether the domain changes, there's normally a roadmap that you want people sending from their traditional domain for a period of time, and then that changes. So simple things like, can you manage your signatures to tell the story around why the name's changing in the emails and stuff like that, with something like Exclaimer is really important during these kind of phases. But equally then thinking about the desktop technology, and I'm sure, Ollie, you might come to this in a later slide or something like that, but desktops, maybe if you've been around for a while, your desktops are still either linked to Active Directory or in a hybrid manner with Entra ID from that perspective. But at some point, they will need to be changed to the new domain. That might create you some authentication problems with legacy applications. So we also do find that on this journey, something like Windows 365 or AVD, so a virtual desktop technology, might be used because it will allow someone to exist both in their old firm and start adopting the tools in the new firm with applications being published if it's the AVD side of things. So the complication of this is very dependent on your organization. We're talking about the kind of Microsoft 365 pieces today, but equally the main apps, how you access those apps and what that journey looks like, and whether there is a temporary virtual desktop or even a long-term virtual desktop. We see certainly a lot of accountancy firms using Citrix or VMware Horizon in the past, and that may be better off transitioning to something like AVD or Windows 365, depending on the number of desktops that you've got.
Yeah, and it depends on where both firms are on that journey. So typically, historically, you might have had Active Directory managing your desktops. Then there's the sort of hybrid part of that as a sort of midpoint, and then a lot of firms are aspiring to being cloud only in terms of their desktop management. So using Intune and Entra typically in the Microsoft sphere. So yeah, it depends where both firms are on the journey as to whether it makes sense to sort of try and keep doing what you're doing if you're on legacy AD systems, or whether you're trying to modernize and you might get to the Entra only side sooner. So we've seen situations where actually the acquiring firm is bigger, slower to move, and they're using Active Directory, and they're acquiring a firm that's actually already using Intune and is already a bit further along because they've had probably less technical debt to get rid of, and they're a bit more agile and potentially a bit smaller. So we have seen situations.
Those smaller firms that they're the ones that adopted Teams, even back in the day, Yammer and stuff like that. They're using all these things, and then all of a sudden they're dragged into a slower moving firm that then maybe don't have all the things that they used to.
Yeah, this is where the more mature people go and recognize actually the way they're doing it over there, that's actually better than what we're doing. So we shouldn't drag a forward-looking firm back into the past because that's the way we've always done it. Maybe we should be looking at adopting what they're doing and then moving.
This is the opportunity for us to mature. Yeah,
absolutely. Which plays nicely into that integration strategy. So that's exactly relevant to what we've just been talking about. What stays, what goes, what changes, and when do you do it?
I think that the piece that I didn't speak about there, but it kind of relates to this and the security and governance pieces we mentioned: backup strategy, DR strategy, cyber incident response strategy. They're often the things that get left behind because the focus is so much on how do we get these two technologies to work together, and then someone goes, oh, but wait a minute, we need to add them to the backup. We haven't tested the DR with them in. So you need to make sure you have that end-to-end approach and how you cover everything, including your security monitoring tools, your endpoint protection tools, your 24/7 SOC that you might be using. All of these kind of things need to come into that integration strategy. What is the time that it is right to standardize those tools and bring them together as well?
Absolutely. And maybe you don't want to be upsetting what you've already got in terms of backup technologies while you're doing the migration. Maybe it might make sense to stay on certain things until that migration is done. But of course, you're going to be wanting to consolidate things to make things more cost effective. You're going to be wanting to make sure that things are backed up and managed in a single place rather than a separate place. So yeah, making those smart choices is really important.
Also disparate relationships in the IT teams, but there's always a correct answer there, that when people are merging together and there's two different firms, the right answer is to come to Kascade to help us with the migration and for your managed services, of course, Ollie.
That's absolutely right. So yeah, roadmap and execution. So this is actually the bit that ideally having worked out all the difficult things in advance, should be relatively easy. Tenant migrations and mergers are never easy. There's a lot of moving parts. There's always a lot going on. But the better you plan it, the better that execution is going to be. So again, it depends on what you've got and where things are going. But typically, in terms of the way these things often play out, is after a lot of planning, doing a dry run of the data copy over a weekend. Normally, those 365 tenants will be merged, and then on that Monday, everyone will be in the same tenant, and then things like desktop PCs will get refreshed. Typically, in a sort of tailed cleanup after that, applications get refreshed. It depends, but I think no two mergers and acquisition scenarios are the same. There's always nuances. There's different applications at different places. So having sort of been there and seen many of these, we're really well placed to talk about what the best strategy might be for what you have. But it's a different answer every time. And sometimes the migration tooling is different each time.
I think for me on this piece, don't underestimate the importance of a dedicated project manager on your side. We will have our project managers that will be assisting from our side, but someone that is managing this project on the customer side is really important. And this isn't just from a technology perspective, this is from a communication, this is from an involvement perspective. The amount of times we do a project like this and there ends up being something that's been disruption, and then you get to the point, well, weren't the users aware that this was happening? And it was, yeah, we told them, we put it on the intranet the other day. Typically, when you're communicating these kind of things, it will involve using 3, 4, 5 different types of communication, making sure you're iterating that communication, making sure that the team leaders have heard about it so they can pass it on to the people in the team, set expectations when there might be disruption, when there might be downtime, when actually they're going to log in and all of a sudden it looks a little bit different to the way that it looked the last time they did it. Maybe their username is going to change next time they log into their laptop. Instead of being initial and last name it's going to be first name dot last name. All of these things that as techies we might think it's a small thing will be really important to people being able to actually do their job, be productive, and equally feel included in the process that is going on.
Yeah, completely. And it's sort of getting that bite size. What does this mean for me as a user? Putting your sort of self in the user's situation, making that communication relevant and simple, and not just IT jargon, which we're probably good at doing.
I think one of the last piece at the bottom there is equally often not done. What does success look like, and what does success feel like? Because when you get to the end of this project, and undoubtedly it is going to have had ups and downs, there's going to have been challenges along the way, but we'll get through them. It's knowing that actually you've achieved that goal, that you've been able to succeed, and then don't forget for you and the team to celebrate when that's been done, because we all know the world of IT. In the days that something's going slightly wrong, everyone's going to be complaining, everyone is going to be calling IT, and everyone's going to be doing it. The day that it's finally worked good, often people don't celebrate. I'm sure the C-level will, because they'll be very aware of what's going on with this project, unlike maybe something like a virtualization upgrade. But make sure that you do kind of know that you've got to the point. We're now in an iterative phase where we're going into project management then from that perspective and moving forward, but you have successfully integrated those firms.
Absolutely. So pitfalls and payoff, I think we've probably covered many of these, but assuming similar means simple. We've sort of talked about that one. It's not always the case, and there are always nuances. There are always differences. So at the headline, you might say, yeah, we're using the same platforms, but when you look into the detail, they may be used differently. There's different bits going on. Bringing in IT too late, that is really a difficult one. I alluded to that earlier when I'd historically been brought in on 2 different projects. I was brought in, this is pre-Kascade, being brought in at the right sort of time, and that worked really well. Another one was when it was all very, very secretive and being brought in too late, and that was only sort of recoverable because the firm we were acquiring was relatively small. So yeah, it was a complete mess, but it could be unpicked relatively simply. But that still had its challenges. Rushing integration, so as quick as possible, but not quicker than possible. You don't want to be given too ambitious a target. And I think I'm thinking back to one that we did, I think last year it was, where we talked to the customer for a long time about this, and then all of a sudden, yes, we're all systems go, and their IT team were being given such an ambitious target that we really pushed back, and they did manage to then push back and get the migration done later. And I think that was really vital. If they'd gone in too soon, overpromised on what they could do, how quickly it would have unraveled pretty quickly. The user experience, yeah, really important. And it might be that users are going through a lot of changes. They're probably going to have a change in their billing system in terms of the day-to-day systems they have. They're probably also going to get their machine wiped at some point, just to get them onto the same standard as the other firm. So that's really important. Having a phased roadmap and communicating it well, and communicating it the relevant bits to end users is really important. And knowing what you're doing in terms of systems of record, that's a really vital thing. You need to think really clearly about what's going on in terms of those applications. You need to know them inside out. You need to know what's stored in them, what's important to users in accounts, important to other users in other places. So yeah, when you get it right, you're just going to get better experience, smoother. You're going to have better collaboration. All those things are listed down on that slide. Anything to add to that one, Barry?
No, not on that one.
Okay, so we're on to the sort of key takeaways. So being ready is what it's all about. It's knowing what you have, knowing what your plan is, getting advice, making sure all the sort of I's are dotted, T's are crossed, etc., and making sure you know how it's going to play out, getting a decent plan in place that's realistic, and getting advice from third parties where you need that, like us, like your providers. So your providers of your key business systems, they need to be involved, they need to be lined up. If there's changes that need to be taking place at their end, they need to be lined up in terms of time frame, making sure everyone's on the same page. But yeah, discovery is a really, really important thing. Do that first. Know what you have. Know what systems are there, and keep drilling into that. Similar platforms don't mean simple integration. We've seen many examples of that. Just because it's Microsoft 365 doesn't mean it's going to be the same both places. Doing the phases, don't rush it. That's really important. And keep your eye on that goal of one operating business, not two sharing ownership.
Definitely. So I hope we've been able to show today just how this is something that we live and breathe. This isn't something we dabble with, and it isn't just Ollie and I. We've got a lot of people inside the firm that do this. We're currently working with one firm that's merging over 40 firms into one. We did quite a big project last year, I think, or it might have been the year before now, with 8 firms all coming in at once because they'd failed to integrate any of them, and they were all quite using advanced features in Microsoft 365. So this is something that we do on a regular basis. We will tell you what we do well, and equally we will tell you where we're happy to assist, but we're not the specialists such as your main line of business systems. Please go and work with your eye managers and your relevant providers to figure out the strategy in those spaces. We want to work with you. We don't want to do a project with you because your team may have to go through this in the future. So there's always an opportunity for us to be able to share workload, to be able to mean that the costs are down. So irrespective of where you are with this at the moment, you might not have an acquisition on there. It might just be that you're getting ready for it. Please feel free to reach out. Ollie, if you could go to the next slide for me as well. Let's just have a chat. If you're starting to get ready, we're working with many of the top 50 accountancy firms now. We're also working with many legal firms on this basis and other organisations. Why not just book a chat with Ollie to kind of go through where your thoughts are and where you are, but equally maybe a good time to kind of just delve into your Microsoft 365 configuration, especially with things like AI playing such an important role at the moment. And if you can come to our AI event in our office, which is next Tuesday, not next Thursday, we'd love to see you there. We've got some great people coming. I think we've got a few accountancy firms coming to that as well that we can introduce you to. But hopefully you found it useful. Ollie, thank you ever so much for sharing all of your wisdom as ever. And thank you for Megan for arranging. Thank you for the great questions as well. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. We look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks.